Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I would like to start this event with a tribal land acknowledgement because although we are not gathered physically together, we believe it's important to acknowledge that YWCA Spokane resides on the traditional homelands of the Spokane people and other Indigenous peoples who are connected to this region. We wish to recognize the Indigenous peoples who have been disposed and displaced from their ancestral and spiritual homes and the taking of their land through colonization. We recognize that land acknowledgement is only a first step towards honoring the contributions of Native Americans and Indigenous peoples today and continue to strive towards policies and practices that bring about justice and reconciliation. We respect and honor the first people of this land, past and present, on which we advocate, work, and live. I want to thank our panelists this morning and all of our participants for taking the time to be a part of this important conversation. And at this time, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. If you would turn your cameras on and we can go ahead and get started with introductions. Just tell us your name, how you got into this work, and what you enjoy most about your role.
Hello, I'm Citlalli, Briseño, Program Supervisor at MIA, Mujeres in Action. How I got into this work, I wanted to reconnect with the Latina community here in Spokane, and I found MIA, and it was a great opportunity. I've been there for a couple of years now, started as an advocate and then moved on as a program supervisor.
Thank you.
I'm Cammie, and I'm the Violence Prevention Coordinator for the Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition. And I've been there since November, so not very long. Before that, I was a junior high and high school English teacher for about a decade. So I've been working with kids for a long time, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. So happy to have both of you today. So like our other Pathways Forward events, this discussion is going to include 3 key parts: defining the problem, outlining some solutions, and then answering some of the questions that our panelists and our guests have about the topic. Over the course of this conversation, as questions come up for you, please enter them into the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so that we can answer as many of them as possible. Please also feel free to utilize the chat feature to throw out other thoughts and observations you may have and communicate with your fellow attendees. Nationally, we see that 1 in 3 young people will be in an abusive or unhealthy relationship. Of those that experience dating abuse, only a third of them will go on to tell a trusted adult. Experiencing violence in youth can have long-lasting impacts. Teens who've experienced violence are more likely to experience alcoholism, eating disorders, violent behaviors, and thoughts of suicide. This makes it all that more critical to prevent violence before it occurs. Now that we've defined the problem, I want to transition our conversation to exploring solutions. We encourage you to continue submitting your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We will be answering some of these questions soon, but to start our conversation today, I want to ask, so both of you work with youth in our community. What does prevention look like in each of your organizations? Citlalli, we can start with you.
Thank you. So prevention with MIA, we're working mostly with our teen youth at this moment. We have pretty good connections with Rogers High School, and we were able to run a pilot program called Jóvenes in Action, which is Youth in Action, teaching them about healthy relationship dynamics, consent, stuff like that. So we're definitely trying to do more outreach and education within the Latina community because there really isn't much. We know that there are survivors, youth survivors out there, but unfortunately we're not seeing the numbers. So we know we need to educate our community a little more on what is happening out there. And I did want to say that Priscila Hernandez is our youth sexual assault advocate. Unfortunately, she could not be here today, but she is the expert in this subject. Thankfully, you know, I have the honor to be able to step in her place, but she is doing amazing work with these teens and developing other programs and campaigns to continue educating our community.
Yeah, that's similar to what we're doing at SRDVC as well. Education is a big part of prevention. What does a healthy relationship look like? What does emotional abuse look like? You know, a lot of times I think people kind of get into relationships and they think that the way that they're being treated is okay because they don't know anything different. Even as adults, you know, we can end up in relationships and be like, wow, something is weird here. What's going on? And then when you learn about what an unhealthy relationship is, what emotional abuse is, what domestic abuse is, then you're like, wow, this is not how it's supposed to be. So modeling those healthy relationships, we use I've been using the Healthy Relationships Toolkit curriculum. And a lot of that is self-knowledge too. So, you know, the relationship that I have with myself informs the relationships that I'm able to have with other people. I think that education piece into self-awareness and emotional awareness is a big part of violence prevention. You know, so community building too, people being able to talk to other people. You know, for me, it's about trust and acceptance and safety. If kids can feel those things, if they have even one environment where those things are present, that's going to help with a lot of their relationship issues and just them being whole people.
I love that. One question that I do have for you is, how do you build trust with the teens that you work with? Because I think oftentimes when we're talking to them, they tend to kind of shut off, or if something feels a little like too targeted towards them, they tend to like shy away from the conversation. So how do you create a safe environment in the places that you're in right now so that teens feel comfortable having these conversations with you?
I was just this morning, I was listening to a podcast or thing that was on the Prevent IPV website, and there was a quote from Martin Luther King, and he was talking about misunderstanding from a person that has goodwill is even more frustrating than misunderstanding from someone that has ill will. And I was thinking, you know, how do we understand each other? How do we understand the people that we're working with? And for me, love is understanding, and that is like radical acceptance. And when kids start to feel like you accept them completely, their music that you hate, their clothes that you think they look stupid, but you accept them even though they are like that. Thank you. Yes, wonderful. That's the website that I was looking at. Thank you. That acceptance is like, oh, well, I can tell her about this. I can tell them about that, because no matter what I say to them, they accept me. And to me, that looks like, you know, not criticizing them, even if they're, you know, saying something weird or whatever. You know, you have your boundaries and your expectations for how they need to conduct themselves, but they know that I'm going to accept them no matter what. And that, I think, builds that safety and that trust. If they can trust you with little things and they know that you're not going to get upset, or you're not going to be like, oh, well, I told you, then they can trust you with bigger things.
Thank you, Cami. That was awesome. With Mia, or with the work that I've seen Priscila do, I've seen her show up. especially with this workshop that we did with teens. She was working with them. We went directly to them. We were hosting these events at the school. So we made it very easy for them to be able to access us, as well as making these conversations very enticing and entertaining. We had a little bit of a stipend, just to get them encouraged and involved. And the group actually kept growing. It started with I think we had a couple spots open, and then we kept going with the sessions, and it was completely full. We had a wait list of students that were wanting to participate in this workshop, which was amazing. So definitely just trying to, as Cami said, just trying to accept them as they are, going to them, talking to them as if they understand, because they do. A lot of people approach teens as if they're not really able to understand complex issues, but they do, and they're talking about it at school. So providing a space for them to openly talk about these questions that might be uncomfortable to ask is really helpful for them.
Thank you for sharing on what that looks like for each of you in your prevention work. I think similar to us for YWCA, we also try to create a safe environment, and we see some groups that are very interested in the topics, and then we see some that kind of close off based on like themselves experiencing DV and growing up in a DV household. But I think it is really important to create that safe space, and it sounds like you both are doing amazing work and creating that safe space for teenagers and allowing them to feel like they can really speak to not only you, but to each other, and kind of shift that culture of violence too, of saying like, hey, this behavior is not okay, and like, let's talk about why it's not only learning from you as professionals, but learning from their peers as well. What cultural challenges have you experienced working with, I know Citlalli, you work with mostly Latinx teens, so what kind of cultural challenges have you faced with that?
Right, there have been many. I think the obvious ones are language barriers, financial barriers, transportation. We can go through the list, but culturally speaking, I think sexual assault and domestic violence are just very taboo topics that are not spoken about. And that's why we focus so much on the very basic education of what is domestic violence, what is sexual assault, just to get our community aware of what these problems are and to be able to put a name to it as well. As for the youth, again, they don't have that education growing up. They don't know what SA is, but they have many questions, right? So we see a gap where they're very curious, but they don't know where to go to ask these questions. And then they don't have people that understand them culturally as well, right? Here with our advocates, all of us are Latinos, we're bilingual, we're constantly speaking Spanglish around the office, which is very common amongst teens, especially. So we're able to connect with them on a more cultural level, on a deeper level. And language is everything. So we're able to communicate with them in Spanish. We're able to communicate with them about things that they know, because we can talk to them about their favorite foods, their favorite music, their favorite artists, so we can relate a little more. But it is very difficult to see the many challenges, especially through the school systems for Latinx youth, because there are many gaps. A lot of our youth are falling through the systems. Although there are more services throughout schools for youth, culturally speaking, many aren't bilingual, services aren't in Spanish, parents might not feel comfortable approaching those systems either. So then students just don't receive these services that are accessible,
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it's difficult to kind of seeing that you can relate in some of those aspects of like not kind of it being a taboo topic in your household, but then trying to provide the space for them and kind of being able to relate to them. I'm sure that they're so appreciative of having someone that they see in this role and say like, oh my God, they're someone that eats the same food or like speaks the same language or that can connect with on a personal level too. Cami, what kind of cultural challenges have you experienced in your role?
You know, I'm working with kids from all different backgrounds. Certainly, I think that there is sometimes initially a level of mistrust for me. You know, I'm a cis white female coming in to be like, let me tell you guys about relationships. So I think, you know, I try to be very mindful of, you know, they're dealing with things I don't know anything about. I've never experienced things like this. I've never been around it. I try to be very mindful that and let them know I'm learning from you too. You're teaching me too. And I think that that's really important. Certainly in my role as a teacher, it was a very poor, but certainly mostly white district, and, you know, culturally was kind of more socioeconomically a lot of barriers. You know, like Citlalli was saying, you know, transportation and money, and, you know, even to go to a counseling appointment was going to be like an hour-long drive, you know, so getting that help in a really small rural town like that is tough.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, it sounds like our teens face a lot more challenges than what we as providers are aware of, because we think like, oh, well, they're teenagers, they should have their parents as like a form of transportation, but that's not the case for a lot of our population. And then even just like access to services, sometimes needing like the parental consent, or parents not agreeing with topics that are being spoken about. I think that could be another challenge that we see often with trying to educate our teens and kind of shift that culture among them. What would you say are some of the common protective factors that your teens have that kind of help them navigate these situations or their backgrounds?
I'll go first there. You know, studies have shown if a kid has one adult in their life that they trust to accept them no matter what, that is always there for them. Maybe that's a parent, maybe that's a grandparent, maybe that's a neighbor, maybe that's a teacher, maybe that's somebody that they meet somewhere else. If they have that one trusted adult, they always do better. So that is certainly a protective factor. The kids that I'm working with now, and some of them are actually adults, so the people that I'm working with, the folks that I'm working with now are they're working to get their GED. That really helps them to have a goal, to have a purpose, a reason to, you know, get up in the morning and this is what I'm doing. I'm not going to be messing around with that other stuff. I don't need to do that because I'm doing my goal. I think that that is certainly a protective factor. And then, you know, community and family support, you know, people who believe them, people who believe in them, are protective factors for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I think at MIA we take a similar approach. Our youth advocate, she's always trying to support, you know, healthy family dynamics and trying to encourage that. So we try to connect them to different resources within the community that will encourage that. If it's mental health, then we'll try to connect them to those services. If it's, you know, fun activities for the families to go do, then we'll try to seek funding for that. Anything that really encourages families to bond together, because we see the children wanting to spend more time with their parents. You know, we work mostly with women, so it's mostly with their moms. And we see these kids wanting that connection, right? So Priscilla does a good job of finding different events to just, you know, encourage that healthy family dynamic.
I love that you both talk about like a trusted adult for teens being a protective factor, because I think we often forget that having just one person in their life can make a big difference. And I think especially for teens who don't have like a healthy role model in their lives, that can be so detrimental in like seeing the difference between a healthy adult figure and then someone who's like very accepting and supportive of who they are as a person as well. So we have a lot of service providers and folks that work with youth. Do you have any advice for them on how to have this conversation with youth if they're having like specific questions about how to talk to youth about healthy relationships, or how to bring up the conversation if they kind of notice that this youth is going through some unhealthy behaviors?
Yeah. Building I mean, these are tough things. Certainly, building that relationship first is very important to, you can trust me, and it can't be performative. You have to actually be trustworthy. You have to care, that I think is key to build that mutual trust, something that, our outreach coordinator, Taffy, is doing these trainings all the time. And I've been so incredibly blessed to be able to be by her side while she's teaching these things. So I've learned a lot about, you would say, I notice you're late for school a lot, or I notice, you have some bruises, or I notice that you're getting texts all the time and you seem very upset after you take a phone call, or, I notice that your boyfriend is waiting for you after work every day. I notice, just these things to kind of like, these are the things I'm noticing. So you're not saying, well, what's going on with that guy? And, it's got to be you're not judging anything. You're not coming up with your own conclusions. You're just saying the things that you've noticed. Because sometimes, they won't think that those things are being noticed. And when someone that they trust and that they know cares about them notices that, you've created a little pocket of safety, for a person to say, yeah, it's kind of weird that he's there all the time. It's kind of weird that we're having this 400 texts a day, and so that can be a way to start the conversation. And then also, Taffy in our business toolkit, this is a big part of it too, the TALK acronym. So if a person is like, yeah, my significant other, my boyfriend or my girlfriend or whatever that they're having this problem with is, maybe things are getting to an abuse place, or maybe I'm just feeling uncomfortable. You do the talk, you thank them for telling you, you ask how you can support them, you listen without judgment, and you can, you're active listening, oh, well, tell me more about this or whatever, but with no judgment. You're not, well, you need to kick that guy to the curb, and you need to, none of the you needs, even though inside you're like, okay, this is what you need to do. And then keep supporting them, offering them resources of, places to call, maybe Mia, maybe the Y, so that they can get some help or get, at least some options.
Kind of empowering them to learn about the behaviors and then seek those resources for themselves when they're ready.
Exactly. I mean, this might be their first relationship. Maybe this is just normal. We text 500 times a day, and he waits for me after school, and he's always there. And, maybe this is just how relationships are. Sometimes we don't know until we know.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think, especially with teens that it's their first time dating, that line between like healthy and unhealthy is so thin, and sometimes it's so blurry that it's like really important for us to hold space for them to be able to distinguish, like, this feels okay for me, or this feels like too much and it doesn't feel healthy.
Yeah, with our youth advocate, she's taking a very creative approach this month. She worked very hard and created like a little relationship assessment. We called it, or she named it, Keep It Real. And it's basically 14 questions for Valentine's Day that gets teens thinking about their relationship. And it's simple questions such as, my Valentine wants to have an open, spontaneous conversation. My Valentine and I make decisions together. My Valentine knows how to listen. So just some questions to get these teens thinking about, does my Valentine, or does my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner do this with me. And then it has a little scaling system to see, you know, how many broken hearts you have or how many full hearts you have. So it's just, you know, a creative way to get this conversation going with teens. We're trying to disperse this with or throughout the school districts in Spokane, Spokane Valley, possibly Cheney as well, just to get teens thinking about these healthy relationship questions.
I love that. I love what Priscilla is doing with the community because I feel like finding creative, interactive ways to engage teens and giving them the opportunity to do it when they're ready is so, so helpful. And even just getting them to start thinking about it. And even just like the quiz, like how cool is it to have them do it and then share it with their friends and say like, hey, like my relationship feels like this. What about for you? So I really love that. Priscilla, it sounds like she's doing amazing work with the youth that she's working with right now.
Yeah, she definitely is.
So it looks like we've been getting some really great questions from the attendees, participants. So please continue sending them in so we can start answering them. We'll start answering them here shortly. But I had a follow-up question on working with teens and especially working with public schools. Has there been, I want to word this correctly. Has there been concerns from parents or teachers or the school district in general about talking to teens about like domestic violence and healthy, unhealthy relationships?
I know with some of our participants that we have worked with, the parents simply don't want to disclose it. They don't want to let the schools know that this is going on at home for many different reasons, mostly being that there's a lack of trust with the schools. We are aware that there are community workers at some schools. Unfortunately, not every single one has those resources. And we do try to educate our community that, hey, there are these social workers there to help you and your kiddos. But like I said, unfortunately, the trust isn't there. And then there's also a little bit of discouragement because there isn't much language access at schools. That is not to say that, you know, we have had many amazing schools that we've gone to that we advocate for participants, let them know that there is a language barrier and they hop right on it. They try to help us any way possible. But unfortunately, there are still many barriers within the school system for language access.
Yeah, I don't personally know about any issues that we've had with parents with the curricula that we've run at North Central High School starting in the fall. We're going to be running the Green Dot bystander program. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, our experience with the Y has been fairly well received. I do think that as a community, we tend to lean towards like healthy relationships, like learning healthy relationships. We take that more positively than learning about unhealthy relationships. For some reason, I feel like the wording sometimes it's almost like it feels like a fresh breath air to hear like, oh, you're trying to teach them about healthy relationships versus like trying to teach them about domestic violence. So thank you for sharing your experience with the school system. So I think now is a good time for us to move forward with panelist questions. So I will go ahead and start asking some of the questions that have been dropped in our Q&A. Again, if you have questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them as time allows. But I will go ahead and get started with, is there anything in place in the schools to educate and empower teens to come forward? In your experience working with public schools or teens in general, have they expressed knowing resources in their school of someone that they can talk to about what's going on if they like chose to do so?
I think that there are so the question is, are students aware of resources? In case they needed to, was that the question?
Yeah, so is it, it's if teens are aware of resources that are available, and if it seems that educators are empowering them to seek those resources.
Yeah, I think they are. But I think that Citlalli is correct when she says there's a lack of trust. I think that, and this obviously isn't for every school and every student and every staff member, but I think that overall that there is a lack of trust. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I'm in this, a toxic family situation or whatever, but I don't feel like this is a safe place for me to put my trust in. This is a safe place that can help me navigate this. I don't know if that answers the question. Citlalli, do you?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't work directly with the teens myself, but if I remember correctly, at this Jóvenes in Action sessions that we had, I'm not quite sure they knew of many resources. I think they were able to list off a couple, but definitely not all the resources that were readily available throughout Spokane. And also, there was a gap with their understanding of their rights as children, as youth as well. So that was pretty interesting to realize.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes it's also just like learning what they know, because I guess if they don't really know what DV is or what healthy relationships are, then it's kind of hard for them to realize that they might need resources to be able to cope with that, and that there's things in Spokane that can help them with those. Like we have our youth advocate here, and she does a lot of work with teens who have witnessed domestic violence, not necessarily experienced it, but if they're growing up in a DV household, she can kind of work with them on some of those things that they witnessed and the consequences of growing up in that. But I think, again, if we're not in direct contact with teens, it can be really hard to push those services out so that they can take advantage of them and really receive the assistance that they feel that they need. Regarding rural areas, and especially when there are known predators like teachers, administrators, or other positions that create an imbalance of power, how do we work with these people in power to create good implementation of programming, even when there is some community pushback about our programs because they are labeled as too progressive?
Wow, yeah. Yeah, it's really about creating relationships, they do not, and when I'm saying they, I mean, by and large, administrators, school boards, etc., they don't want to bring in a lot of programming, a lot of times just because they don't have a lot of time, they don't have a lot of money. Are parents going to get upset about things? What are we doing? What is the point of this? Is this on the standardized test? No. This is really something that's for society at large, and sometimes that kind of gets a little, we kind of lose track of that sometimes when you're in that system. So certainly, having your numbers there, like, we've got all these, here are the statistics about domestic violence, here are the statistics about, people being harmed or killed, because of these issues. Certainly, it seems like really bad things have to happen before people start to take action and start to think, wow, maybe this would be really beneficial, to have a program addressing these issues after something really bad happens. And, I hate that it's like that, but it seems that it's kind of like that. So how to get the programming there? Yeah, build the relationships, talking to the teachers, talking to the staff members, what are they seeing? I think that that's kind of the way in getting the buy-in from staff.
Thank you, Cami. I think I would completely agree with that. At MIA, our policy team, we work mostly with the court systems in the city. Unfortunately, we don't do much work with the school systems yet, but I think you're definitely on point. Building those relationships, keep having those conversations, because unfortunately, we're not going to be able to make change with just one conversation. So keeping it relevant, getting more voices involved, having partners that resonate with you and that will also share the same message as you. And creating those relationships, like you said, with teachers, community members, possibly students, possibly all other faculty and people in power positions. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing about that? Your PTO, those are your parents. And remember, in the school system that everybody works for the parents. That, we sometimes forget that, but the parents are the bosses. So go to a PTO meeting, talk to the parents, and what are you seeing in, on the football team? What are you seeing? What are your kids talking about? What are their relationships like? Everybody starts dating in 8th grade, and everything gets crazy. What are we seeing here? Because if you can get the PTO to endorse something like that, the parents to say, wow, we really do need something, for our kids, that's huge too.
Right. And I think you are right, Cami, getting parents buy-in on programs is so beneficial, because if a teen comes home and is like, oh, I'm learning about this, but they don't get the full context of it, it could really shift whether or not the parents want their teen to engage in those conversations, versus if they are aware of it, they can say, oh yeah, that's great. Like, I'm so happy that you're learning about these healthy and unhealthy behaviors, and even be able to hold those conversations at home of like, what are you learning? What are you recognizing? What did you think about that topic? And having that open line of communication between a teen and a parent, because we know that oftentimes the teens that do experience dating violence, they won't tell their parents. And so kind of just also shifting that culture of helping them help parents be their safe and trusted adult as well. So another question that I have is, are we watching for boys who are experiencing domestic violence from their female or same-sex partners? And do your programs work with boys and men too?
That's a great question. I don't think we focus on gender. With at least the work that we've been doing, we're all inclusive. So it does not matter which gender you identify with, you're welcome to, first of all, receive MIA services, but also be involved in our events, be involved in Jóvenes in Action, but we are not specifically focusing on that boy or male perspective. We do make it aware that domestic violence and sexual assault can, either gender can be the victim or the perpetrator. So that is at the foundation of all of our education and prevention. As for our services at MIA, again, we are open to all genders, all races, all ages. And we have had many male survivor, or a couple male survivors come to MIA, and that is a frequent question with our community, that we're still at a point where people are asking, can men be survivors of domestic violence? Can boys be survivors of domestic violence? So we're still trying to educate at a very fundamental level. But yes, we're open to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly when we're talking about these things, statistically, a woman or a girl is much more likely to experience dating violence at the hands of a male. So a lot of times, like in our scenarios and stuff, that's the sort of default language that we use. because, you know, that's usually how it goes, that statistically that's the norm. But yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're talking about, you know, domestic abuse, when you're talking about, you know, manipulation tactics, all these different things, it can go either way. Also, I mean, like the kids that I'm working with, a lot of times, you know, it's dating violence and stuff, but you know, we have relationships with a lot of other people than boyfriends and girlfriends. We have relationships with parents and siblings and cousins and uncles and aunts. And, you know, what is an unhealthy dynamic? Like, what is a power imbalance? When is someone using, you know, coercive control to get you to do what they want? You know, it's more, where is that power imbalance and who is holding the power? I think is the biggest thing. But thank you for that question. That's great.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both for sharing. I think with our agency as well, with YWCA Spokane, we don't discriminate against gender, race, religion, but I do think that a lot of for our programming, we default to they, them pronouns and partners versus like boyfriend and girlfriend, because we want teens to understand that anybody can perpetrate and receive violence. Like it's not exclusive to like one sex over the other. So I think that it's awesome that all of our programs are kind of focusing on that gender neutral language and saying like, you can experience it, but you can also be the one that's perpetrating this violence, and holding space to have conversations of like, this is unhealthy regardless of what gender you identify with. It's still not a healthy behavior if it's coming from your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner. Another question, Christina asks, are there more male or females who come forward for help with teen dating violence in your experience working with teens?
Is the question is it more males or females who come forward with dating violence issues? Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Are there more males or more females who come forward to help with teen dating violence? So more that are disclosing that they're experiencing dating violence.
In my experience, female for sure.
Yes, I think I'd agree with Kimmy.
In your experience working with teens, do you have, I'm curious to know how you navigate or what you offer for services for teens who may be perpetrating the violence. I know sometimes when we're growing up in households and we're seeing it becomes kind of normal for us. I've had experiences where teens will say something and I'm like, oh, that's unhealthy, but kind of holding that conversation to say like, for them to hear from their peers why it's unhealthy. But is there resources that you offer that you offer to teens who disclose that maybe they're perpetrating violence?
In the Healthy Relationships Toolkit that I've been using, it's a lot of scenarios, and it's very, you know, you always want to be non-judgmental. You don't want to be like, you're an abuser, you know, even if they are kind of doing, you know, maybe some of those behaviors. So I think that being able to look from the outside at some of those things can help them. I haven't specifically encountered something like that where somebody was like, wow, I really think that I might be, you know, abusing my girlfriend or boyfriend, you know, my partner. So so I don't have, I guess, firsthand experience with that. But I think a lot of these issues are coming to light, and people are, and I'm speaking about adults too, kind of becoming more aware of these kind of relationship dynamics and how destructive they are, which I think is a really good step in the right direction.
Mia, as of right now, we do not have services, I think because of the same reason. We haven't had anybody come to us and disclose that they might be perpetrating these behaviors. But definitely having these conversations with the youth of what is healthy behavior and what isn't, I feel like it opened up the discussion for them to really reflect on their personal behaviors and also what they've been experiencing. And I think one of you to hit on something earlier is that, you know, or they're portraying behaviors that they see at home, right? Or they see on media or from their friends all over. They're picking up everything. So it's easy for them to think it's normal, especially if it's very normalized behavior. So definitely having those conversations with them of what is healthy, what isn't. But it's something to look into as well of how can we support these teens that are possibly thinking that, you know, they're perpetrating these unhealthy behaviors.
Right. And you kind of touched on this a little bit already. You lightly mentioned it. So I think it's a good opportunity to ask, what boundaries are you teaching your teens, or what boundaries can parents teach their children when it comes to kind of learning about what they're comfortable and uncomfortable with, but then especially moving into like dating and starting to date and kind of starting to explore partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first step is, you know, how how to set a boundary when I've decided that I have one. You know, that's really tough. And sometimes parents kind of have to help with that. You know, I can't be on my phone texting all night. So, you know, at 9:30, we're gonna shut it down. It doesn't mean that I don't want to talk to you or I'm mad at you. It just means that after 9:30, we're all done texting and talking on the phone. You know, that might be a boundary that, and you could even say, well, mom said, you know, that I can't do that. You know, but that's a building block. You know, that's a building block to being able to set a boundary. Like, you know, I don't feel comfortable getting sexually active. I don't feel comfortable being, you know, in a space where people are drinking and partying and doing drugs, you know. I think that they have to feel, and this is for grown-ups too, that we have to feel like, you know, I deserve to have a boundary. I deserve to be able to say no and to say yes, and to say when I've had enough. I can even change my mind at the last minute. I'm allowed to do that. I'm an autonomous sovereign being, and I'm allowed to do that. So that, you know, even before you have a conversation about boundaries, you're having a conversation about, well, you deserve to be able to make your own decision with your body. You know, I mean, these are really tough, but certainly, you know, if you, when your kids are little and you're making them do things that they don't want to do already, and then later you're giving them the message that now they can set a boundary, that's problematic. So something to think about is, you know, how am I treating my child's body before they get to the place where they are, you know, having relationships, you know, teaching them early about setting boundaries. No, grandpa, I don't want to hug, you know, that's okay. I think that stuff is really important. Citlalli?
Yeah, with our Jóvenes in Action, they loved the entire topic of consent, and they were excited about it. I think the facilitators dove into the power and control wheel. They had a bunch of scenarios of what is consent, what isn't. And these kids were so excited that they made memes about consent, just, you know, to get them engaged and to get them thinking, what is consent to you, you know? So everything that Cami mentioned falls under consent, power and control, you know, having that autonomy and the ability to say yes and no and have it be respected and understood. So I think that's definitely a really creative approach that, you know, our facilitators took, and Priscilla is definitely taking that approach with her participants that she's directly working with as well.
I love that. I love holding space to positively talk about it and to not shy away from the conversation. And as parents, like reinforcing the boundaries that our children set and saying like, I don't feel comfortable hugging them. Okay, like that's fine. Maybe a handshake. No, okay, then that's fine. You don't have to say hi at all. And kind of, it seems like our culture is shifting into that, but reminding teens that they do have the autonomy to say yes or no, and that the people, like people's reactions to their boundaries is their reactions. Like they don't, it's okay for them to not get a good reaction out of their boundary, but that it's not their responsibility to make that person feel good about the boundary that they have set forth. Thank you so much for all of those questions. Unfortunately, we are running short on time, so we will not be able to answer any more questions at this time, but we really appreciate your engagement today. And then to start bringing this discussion to a close, I want to ask each of you to share your takeaways from this conversation. There's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, Mia's doing such amazing stuff. I'm stealing the meme thing, so I'm taking that with me. I love the questions too. Certainly a takeaway. I mean, just to get kind of vulnerable here, the people asking about like the gendered language that I was using. I'm really going to be thinking about that.
Thank you, Kimmy. No, it's awesome to hear all the work that you're doing with the youth, and how you're able to, build these trusting relationships with them, because it seems like you have more direct access to youth. We're still on that education and prevention phase. We're still trying to get youth to come to us. So it's really inspiring to see how you're connecting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of amazing work that each of our organizations is doing. And I think having not just like a centralized focus, but that our goal is to touch every single teen in Spokane is really going to create that shift. And hopefully in a few years, we'll be able to see that shift happen and it be something that's like very recognizable. But I think the work that you both are doing and that the Y is doing is so amazing. And it's so important for us to continue doing the prevention work and holding space for teens to learn about healthy and unhealthy relationships. I am definitely feeling inspired in how we move forward today and in our future. So I want to thank you both so much for being a part of this panel, to our attendees and participants for submitting all of their amazing questions and sharing their time with us today. And then I just wanted to share a little bit more about next steps. So this webinar is being recorded and we will be sending it out and sharing it with everyone via email soon. And we will be also sharing it over our social media channels as well. If you found it valuable, we really encourage and would appreciate for you to share with your friends, your family, just anybody that you think would benefit from listening to this conversation. Again, we really want to thank you for your time. And then just a couple of resources for you to kind of continue the conversation and take action steps towards helping us shift this culture for teens. There is a End That Violence conference happening Tuesday, February 28th from 9 to 4 p.m. From the 28th through March 1st. If you know of any teens that are interested in doing so, please encourage them to sign up. And then our YWCA Spokane does have a teen council. So if you know of any teens that would be interested in kind of shifting the dynamic and how we talk about healthy relationships, I would love for you to encourage them to apply. A lot of their voices will impact how we ourselves talk to teens. So those are a couple of plugins that we have for actions that you can take to promote healthy relationships in our community. We're so grateful for such a supportive community. And we know that together we can get upstream and work to prevent violence in Spokane. Thank you all for everything that you do, for the amazing work that you're doing with your organizations, and for spending time here with us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.